obviously Charmaine as well. I mean, that was amazing. There's lots of connections we could almost make, and it's quite nice that she kind of spoke before us, because there's many tangents. I mean, endurable monstrosity, masculinity, human disposability certainly run through what we're looking at. And just to take that notion of the vampire squid maybe one further, the vampire squid obviously takes in what it requires, blood, capital, but a vampire squid also has the capacity to defend itself and to spray ink and to invisibilize what it's doing. And maybe we want to introduce that notion of the kind of inky capacities of these sort of squid logistics. So yeah, unless the water is safer than land, as a research collective commenced in November 2017, following a meeting with Yanis Kalpouzis from Global Legal Action Network. It begins with a communique submitted by 17 leading international refugee law scholars, analyzing a decade of arbitrary and inhumane offshore detention established and maintained by successive Australian governments as a means of preventing and deterring asylum seekers and refugees from accessing asylum procedures in Australia. This mainly took place at Australian-run detention centres on the islands of Manus, outside Papua New Guinea, and Nauru in Micronesia. Significantly, the communique calls for the International Criminal Court to open an investigation on Australia and the collusive structures between government, military, and corporate officials in these crimes.
It is the policy and practice of the Australian government to intercept any vessel that is seeking to illegally enter Australia and safely remove it beyond our waters. If you travel by boat without a visa, you will not make Australia home. The rules apply to everyone: families, children, unaccompanied children, educated and skilled. There are no exceptions. Do not believe the lies of people smugglers. These criminals will steal your money and place your life and the life of your family at risk for nothing. The message is simple. If you come to Australia illegally by boat, there is no way you will ever make Australia home.
Operation Sovereign Borders was a strategy that commenced in September 2013 and provisionally ended in February 2017. The scale of the operation was huge, mobilising an estimated 9.6 billion Australian dollars into a military and naval operation and propaganda campaign to deter asylum boat arrivals from Australia. The policies and associated propaganda of Operation Sovereign Borders served to secure the border outside and promote exclusive national identity inside. We began our research documenting the sheer scale of the operation through fragmentary media reports, witness testimonies, and official Senate hearing and court documents. What soon became clear in the streams of incidents we evidence here is a pattern of systematic human rights abuses on the waters between Vietnam and Indonesia. From the violation of the law of non-refoulement to legal detention and movement, denial of adequate asylum procedure, deprivation of basic human rights, violence, and criminal abetting of people smugglers. Our research in the weeks that followed the compiling of this list began to focus on several specific cases and developed a set of creative forensic methodologies to cross-reference available media sources and overcome the general lack of information. We hope in what follows, from vessels cut loose in high seas with inadequate fuel, to a prison ship towed 22 days off Australia's east coast, to the procurement of increasingly covert vessel types to mislead the international community, to a refusal to conduct rescue obligations and the denial of the most basic assessment of refugee claims, and to the subsequent imprisonment, torture, and in some cases disappearance of individuals to their return to countries, adds to the indictment of the architects of Operation Sovereign Borders, and a government that continues to conflate a humanitarian refugee crisis with a people smuggling epidemic for political ends and as justification for their ongoing violation of the core human rights of a vulnerable population at sea.
The first case we document concerns Risky 02, the name of a fishing boat with 45 asylum seekers that became an important touchstone for the injustices occurring under the Australian Border Patrol. This example is part of a larger picture of a systematic, evolutionary, and grave set of apparatuses designed for deterrence of boats from Indonesia. The video, Risky 02, was created using an assemblage and reinterpretation of news reports on the interception and subsequent abuse of asylum seekers from December 27, 2013, and found January 6, 2014, in Indonesian waters. This event was documented by ABC Australia, as well as refugees on the boat, which created a subsequent media storm critiquing the unethical treatment of individuals attempting to reach Australia for safety. Mistreatment includes burns on refugees, limited access to bathrooms, and refusal to search for drowning individuals.
So big wave is like 2-3 meters come. Then they hit the boat, and then both bodies make shaking. That time, there is 4 people, they're sitting, and Abdullah, he was sitting up at that time too. 4 people fall down on the water, and we don't have a jacket, life jacket.
Pinkas, maxaan maqlay qeylo iyo buuq bad ilmaha. Maxaa liidhahay waa dadaada dhaceen iyo waxaas. Anagana ma ogeenin waqtigaas ilaa subaxdii camal oraxda markaas soo baxdo walaalahay waa kimid oo dadka oo ugu dhacay.
So which beach did you land on?
Come here.
We saw one big ship from far is coming towards us. They came, they round us, some of them by this side, some of them by this side. They said, how are you? Are you fine? We said, yes, we are fine. Just we have people, lost 4 people in that direction. Said, okay, now we are going to look for the people, for your people that they fall down. But you have to go to the boat. It's not safe place in your place. They say there is a lot of crocodile, there is a lot of spider, there is a lot of dangerous animal here.
They tied me by the plastic rope and kicked me by shoes in here. I start to run in the island. I don't want to go back. And they say I have to go back to the boat.
Markaan kaca waa u sheegay walaalkayaas dhum waa u sheegay maxaa liidhahay fadhiiso waa raadineynaa waanu socon fadhiiso waa raadineynaa fadhiiso waa raadineynaa waa nin liitum bakhaakhaa liisood markabkood yariiska markabka yariiskana maxaa liigay markabka weynka agtiisa cirbadaa liisii cirbadaas nisbat munawimaa ku jira hurdadii.
One of the asylum seekers filmed on a mobile phone as Australian military personnel stood guard.
The Armidale patrol boat was kind of doing circles or just out a bit further, and there's a lot of sand shoals around this. I guess he was staying in the deeper water. Then we saw the asylum boat, blue and white thing, and we estimated 20 to 30 people on the front deck. They're all geared up in life jackets when we got there, and about 4 of the Navy blokes, and they seemed to have things in pretty good order.
and they treat us by force and everything they said, it's not good.
Sometimes they say you, they speak, you are comfort. You yourself, you choose to come. Not we don't give you invitation to come to the country, so you have to accept the consequences what you did.
They say, sit down, don't do this, don't do this. They are shouting. Well, sometimes I not understand. Some words they would come out from his mouth.
And how did the asylum seekers respond emotionally?
They are crying. Asylum seekers also, they are crying. The women are crying. The people are shouting.
They said, now as a punishment, you have to stay here 5 hours. The sun is shining, from a sky on you. This is punishment.
We put sugar in the engine, and water in the fuel to stop the engine.
The second day that they started, they said for the toilet, only one time for a man in the daytime, for a woman in the nighttime only. When she started crying, the young people, they said, no, we have to go by force to the toilet.
Then dagaal meesha ka dhacay askartii dadkii inta isku buuqay askartii qaarkood suntii dadku buufiyeen
yani bacdan waa soo degay bacd hoos ugu jirtay motorkiisa ee taalim famno iyagana meesha joogeen askarta hoos ugu jireen marka galay oo aan raadinayo sidii ay u buufiyeen marka hal bantoran shaqeynay aniga wax oo yani raadinaa meel qabsado abaar birtiya ku dhigay marka dibkan isu gaarleen hadii sunta inaa la gelinay dibkan isu gaarleen
ali maxaa arkay bobis asugoo agtay ku soo orday indhahay dhahay gacantiisa soo guban waa arag gacantiisa asugoo oo guban waa arkay
I am in a gate. I saw them with my eyes. Abdullah, he was in the top, I think so. But I'm sitting there, so they catch from his hands like this one. They put it on the exhaust of the engine that is hot, that's taking, fuel, the smoking out of the engine. So they put like this one after one. And they told, after they bend them and they take them out, they come and they call me, Yusuf, translate for anyone here. If anyone try to go to the toilet again, we will punish them like this one. Tell them. They're afraid because they don't want to speak another and they lose the chance for the recognition of refugee. And then they will face another problem.
Well, for a view from Indonesia, I spoke to MP and Foreign Affairs Commission member Tantowi Yahya in Jakarta. Tantowi Yahya, video has emerged today showing asylum seekers being treated for burns on their hands, they allege caused by an Australian Navy transfer to Indonesia. Australia's Immigration Minister Scott Morrison says the Australian government will not stand for its Navy being sledged with unsubstantiated claims and spurious allegations. How do you view the situation?
Well, I think we still need to clarify these allegations. I mean, I'm not in a position to give any comment on that. We still have to wait for the very clear informations that we get from the institution related to the investigations on the fact. But if it is true, then the government of Australia has clearly violated human right of the asylum seekers, and at the same time they also have violated the territory of Indonesians.
The Indonesian Navy report that I referred to had a photograph of burn wounds on a hand, and it said, and this is the quote, resulting from being forced to hold on to the ship's engine by the Australian Navy. Does it concern you that an official Indonesian Navy report would make such an assertion?
Well, Barry, constantly repeating these claims, whether it's citing that report or citing anything else on the ABC, doesn't make these claims any more true than the day you first reported them. So, look, I note that, Barry, but there is no substantiation to these claims. There never has been. The review that was done in the normal course of events that follows any operation was conducted. Assurances were given to me and General Campbell on that basis. I'm satisfied with that, and there's been nothing that has been presented that warrants any further review.
Today's as you know, almeen badoodaas ka dhintay walaalkay anana been ma sheegay wax ma karabi Australia ama leeyahay isiis makarabi wax makarabi ma fahamt maxaa iisi walaalkay haddaa hesho ha ii raadis ha ii keento walaalkay
One of the modalities used by the Australian government to deal with unauthorised maritime arrivals within Operation Sovereign Borders is a strategy referred to as take-back, in which Australia works with a country of departure to effectively return passengers and crew, either by plane or via an at-sea transfer. We want to question the legitimacy of the imprisonment of 46 asylum seekers on board the Australian Navy vessel HMAS Coulis for almost a month, before they were taken back to Vietnam. On the 7th of March 2015, Tran Thi Loan, pictured here with her family, and 45 other people fled Vietnam. The asylum seekers departed from Phan Thai port on a small fishing boat. The compact and unsafe boat held the passengers for 13 days at sea. Through our analysis of each geographical and architectural space that held the asylum seekers, from the country of origin to their return home, we aim to disclose Australia's unjust and unlawful take-back system. On the 20th of March, after 13 days at sea, the fishing boat was intercepted by the Australian Navy HMAS Coulis. The HMAS Coulis is a Bay-class landing ship, 176 meters long with a large flight deck aft. It has a crew of 158 members and can hold up to 700 passengers, as well as heavy artillery such as tanks and trucks. The documentation of events that occurred on the vessel was unclear from both the Vietnamese and the Australian governments. Interestingly, the HMAS Coulis was referred to as a prison ship in the committee's Senate report from the 25th of May. According to an interview with Loan, there were no translators provided on board the HMAS Coulis, meaning the asylum seekers were detained for 22 days without being informed on their whereabouts during their entire period at sea. In the end, none of the asylum seekers qualified for refugee status and were taken back to Phong Tu, Vietnam. We were able to produce a tracking map of the vessel's trajectory at the time by gathering and refining the information provided by an automatic identification system, such as the unique identification system on each vessel, the position of the vessel, course, and speed. We managed to reconstruct the route followed by the HMAS Coulis between the 22nd of March and the 5th of April 2015, while the asylum seekers were on board. The 46 asylum seekers were reportedly held on board until the 18th of April 2015 in order to be subjected, with the support of the Vietnamese officials, to the enhanced screening process. The AIS maps show the first recorded exit point for the HMAS Coulis from the HMAS Catapult Naval Base in Sydney on the 22nd of March. However, due to the known knowledge that the Vietnamese vessel was intercepted at high sea 2 days before the HMAS Coulis returned to base, we can assume the refugees were on board. The vessel's next stop was on the 23rd of March, an area 200 kilometers from Sydney. The vessel spent 7 hours at night drifting in the Gulf without docking. Before entering the bay, we can see the HMAS Coulis making forlorn courses in front of the city of Wollongong, a few meters outside Australian territorial waters. The last stop recorded was made between the 1st and the 5th of March 2015. The vessel made a trip to Darwin. The vessel reached Darwin and made 3 circular rounds before heading towards the Coonawarra Naval Base on the 5th of March. The ship halted for 2 hours before leaving the base and headed northwest with the migrants presumably still on board. The Senate report also highlights that the asylum seekers underwent a procedure referred to as enhanced screening, which had been introduced in 2012 for Vietnamese and Sri Lankan nationals on the assumption that those nationals are not generally considered to be at risk. Therefore, the procedure of enhanced screening is a preliminary simplified interview to determine whether the interviewees can proceed to an asylum request. As a result, most enhanced screening interviews end with the take-back of the asylum seekers. After reassurance from the Australian government that none of the asylum seekers would be prosecuted upon arrival back to Vung Tau, Vietnam, on the 22nd of April, Luan, her husband, and 2 other refugees were arrested for the crimes of people smuggling and taken to Binh Tuan, where they were tied and imprisoned for 4 years. The imprisonment of returning asylum seekers constitutes a pattern that has emerged in a number of cases we investigated. According to international law, states have to abide to non-refoulement, where they will not send asylum seekers back to their country of origin if they would be endangered by returning. Luan's case not only highlights the Australian government's negligence to follow international law, but conveys a careless attitude towards the safety and survival of the asylum seekers. Through government agreements, specifically with Vietnam and Sri Lanka, individual circumstances were ignored following a reduced process of enhanced screening. Furthermore, the government justifies these actions by highlighting, as seen in the Senate report, a trustful relationship with Vietnam government, regardless of the numerous times this trust was broken, as is demonstrated clearly in Luan's case, but also in all the other cases we investigated within the report.
The following is stated in the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees Practical Manual for Monitoring Immigration Detention. Begin quote. It is incumbent on the state to mitigate the loss of liberty as far as possible by ensuring that the detention environment and conditions are respectful of the dignity and non-criminal status of immigration detainees. Further, care needs to be taken in the design and layout of the premises to avoid, as far as possible, any impression of a carceral environment, end quote. We believe that pushing back asylum seekers or holding them on sea constitutes arbitrary arrest and detention, which is in contravention of Australia's obligations under international law. For instance, while a rescue operation may mean that asylum seekers are held on a vessel pending their disembarkation at a place of safety, this can transform into arbitrary detention if Australia cannot show that holding them on a boat under certain conditions is proportionate in the circumstances. Through our proposition, the lifeboat functions as an offshore detention facility. The OSB lifeboat functions as an offshore detention facility. The OSB lifeboat does not function as a place of safety. The OSB lifeboat functions as a non-innocent semi-submersible, and the OSB lifeboat functions as a covert refouler device. We encounter and describe the parameters of our investigation to the object relations of offshore detention. Is the amount of fuel provided by the Australian Navy adequate or arbitrary? Are calculations of food, water supply, and basic requirements considered in relation to the capabilities of the vessel? Are the fundamental rights of the individual to a fair and effective asylum procedure jeopardized by an assessment like the enhanced screening procedure? In this investigation, we began by corroborating the news reports in order to determine with some accuracy both the geolocation and date of 5 key events in the boat's journey. These would be indicated by the red bolded line. The departure, the point of origin from Indonesia, the interception, the point of first contact with Australia's Navy, the turn back, the point at which the asylum seekers are towed back towards Indonesia, the cut loose, the point at which accompanying Navy ships leave the lifeboat, and the crash land, the arbitrary point at which the lifeboat has been steered towards land. After mapping these events, we carried out an initial exercise to see if we could spot any of the boats and accompanying Navy vessels by using Google's Earth Engine software. Knowing the approximate locations and dates of where the boats were stationary and where they were in motion, we wrote a script to collect all relevant satellite images within our selected parameters. While an interesting method in principle, these images proved to be largely overcast with clouds, and subsequently finding any fleet of boats in high seas proved to be near impossible. Moving forward, we shifted our investigation from the high seas to the period between the cut loose and the crash land, where the lifeboats moved without supervision through Indonesia's territorial waters. Drawing on the notion of the place of safety, we began to question whether this period aboard a life vessel could be adequately considered a place of safety. We found the reasons for its inadequacy as a place of safety to be threefold. These are what we've worked through, the diagrams that we're looking at right now. So, in the crash land, the life vessel fails as an appropriate apparatus for sea navigation. In each case we investigated, an untrained people smuggler was tasked with navigating a ship he was unfamiliar with, or she was unfamiliar with. Furthermore, these vessels did not have the correct navigational equipment to access the terrain for suitable landing places, a flaw that led to one boat being stuck on shallow rocks, where refugees were forced to jump into the water before trekking into the dense jungle. In diagram B, we expatiated on the strategic capping of resources. In all the cases we examined, there was evidence of wrongdoing in Australia's actions through the structural regulation of resources on board. By limiting the amount of fuel and capping the engines so no new fuel could be added, Australia forced migrants to head directly to the nearest land without the ability to navigate towards a safe place for the vessel. By limiting drinking water and food on board each vessel, the government, in effect, controlled the movement and safe passage of refugees as they sought to find a place of safety. In the last three diagrams, we placed further points of systematic negligence. Boats were towed towards arbitrary places that did not reflect any willingness to transport asylum seekers to a place of safety. Vessels carrying asylum seekers are cut loose to nearest points of land that contain lush patches of jungle and are between a 4 to 8 hour hike to any social or civic services. This journey could be prolonged if the refugees did not have any electronic navigation systems with them. In conclusion, we insist that Operation Sovereign Borders Turnback Procedures is arbitrary and thus violent. Thank you.
People smuggling describes a material or financial benefit that is gained by those who are entering into a state illegally. In the case of 5th of May 2015, Amnesty reported that the Australian government were responsible for people smuggling offences. The aggravating circumstance of putting the lives of asylum seekers in danger is evident as the fishing boats provided for the turnback were too small, and an insufficient amount of fuel was provided. In addition, they mistreated the asylum seekers while they were in Australian customs, forcing them to stay in the rain for hours with no shelter, detained them in overcrowded and unventilated cells, denied them medical treatment, and transferred them onto one of the procured fishing boats with no toilet. In our interpretation of people smuggling offences, we saw the Australian government explicit in these activities and retermed this as state-enacted smuggling. It is both applicable in regards to the treatment of asylum seekers, but also how the fishing vessel could be seen as a financial incentive for the smugglers. As a continuation of the conceptual understanding of the place of safety, we took 3 cases where migrants travelled from Indonesia and in the process of the turnback were given fishing boats procured by the Australian government. These boats were first seen docked in Darwin Harbour on the 5th of March 2015 and were a replacement of the fishing boats described previously. This was a direct response to the panic that the orange lifeboats created by those on Indonesian shores, but also as a camouflage mechanism that blurs the identity of the state-procured boats that appear like any other fishing boat on the horizon. The ambiguity surrounding the procurement of these fishing boats and their outsourcing to Asia also enhance the increasingly creative and calculated measures that the Australian government have taken to push back asylum seekers, and which occur under a veil of secrecy. We began our process with forming a narrative of each case and created a series of maps, such as this one, to be read clockwise. We framed it around 4 stages of the pushback. 1, interception, the point at which the boat was intercepted by the Australian government. 2, detention, the process of migrants being detained. 3, place of safety, the point at which the asylum seekers were transferred onto the fishing vessels. And 4, state-enacted smuggling. It is in these last 2 moments of action in which we see opportunities for further conceptual and legal inquiry. In each of the 3 cases, we found that the Australian government provided very limited amount of fuel and food resources, and a map that pointed towards Rotti Island, which prevented the asylum seekers from turning back to Australia. Due to the limited amount of information provided by the Australian government regarding the fishing boats, we could not access accurate boat specifications beyond testimonial accounts. This led us to question more the ambiguity surrounding the procurement of the fishing vessels by the Australian government. In various Australian news outlets, it was leaked that the Australian government had procured 10 fishing vessels from Hong Kong registered company Dragon Industries Asia and were built by MB Marine, who have almost an identical description on their website as Dragon Industries Asia. The Australian government's denial of such procurement led us to further investigate Dragon Industries Asia, whose website had no details regarding the design of the fishing boats. We found the same lack of information on the archive of MB Marine's website. We requested access to both the company's details and the Hong Kong registrar, where we identified the directors, Tim Clements at Dragon Industries Asia and Mark Bruins of MB Marine. Looking into their social media accounts, we found that there was obvious friction between the 2 directors, with Mark Bruins declaring publicly that Tim Clements owed him significant amounts of money, and even created a website, lookingfortimclements.com, which we could not locate. Days after investigating this, we found that the Dragon Industries Asia website had been permanently shut down. Various news reports in 2016 found pictures of the fishing boats being transferred onto the Australian naval vessel Ocean Shield. The boats identified appeared to have the same names on the side as those detailed on MB Marine's website, indicating, however never confirmed, that the Australian government were procuring even more fishing boats. Although speculative, our findings expanded the ways in which we understood the notion of the fishing boat. The single-use vessel, showered with secrecy, has a deeper cultural significance of how the Australian government wishes to project a clear anti-immigration stance, as well as mask its policy implementation through privatisation and corporate actors.
Australia is no pariah state. It is a relatively wealthy Western democracy. Its actions and policies have an added effect in terms of being influential and being replicated elsewhere, specifically in other states that are receiving refugee flows. The latest UNHCR statistics reveal that 2.34 million people given refugee status in 2015. Only 0.1%, that is 2,377 people, were given refugee status in Australia. The Australian model has gained traction in other countries. Denmark recently introduced a bill which would authorize the government to take refugees' valuables to pay for detention. This bill was remarkably similar to Australia, charging asylum seekers for their detention. Danish government officials, after inspecting detention on Nauru, remarked that the Australian detention is an interesting model. Austria's Foreign Minister, Sebastian Kurz, has made similar suggestions, citing the Australian example, noting that while the model cannot be fully replicated, its principles can be applied in Europe. In this way, we also see Brexit as another expression to a process of excision. In an executive order banning the entrance of certain categories of refugees, the President of the United States, Donald Trump, has attempted to put in place a policy of highly regulated deportation in violation of non-refoulement. Though our investigation ended at the close of 2017, the situation in Manus Island continues to unfold. Officially closed by Australian authorities last October, there has been an ongoing series of protests against the detainment and unethical treatment of individuals by the detainees as well as activists in Australia. So far, 58 men from the facility have been relocated to the US, and more are in the process of being vetted and transferred. According to a report from this month by the United Nations Refugee Agency, there are still more than 500 asylum seekers on Manus without adequate facilities, resources, and health care. Last week, Home Affairs Minister Peter Dutton slated, "If you undo the policies, if you allow people to come from Manus and Nauru, you will restart the boats. That is very clear. It's very clear on the intelligence available to us that if you close down regional processing centers, that if you don't turn back boats where it's safe to do so, you have the resolve that we've shown the boats will recommence." The detailed report of our research is available on this document in case anybody would like to see it.
Thank you. Okay, this is a poem by Warsan Shire called Home. No one leaves home unless the home is the mouth of a shark. You only run for the border when you see the whole city running as well. Your neighbors running faster than you breathe bloody in their throats. The boy you went to school with who kissed you dizzy behind the old tin factory is holding a gun bigger than his body. You only leave home when home won't let you stay. No one leaves home unless home chases you fire under feet, hot blood in your belly. It's not something you ever thought of doing until the blade burnt threats into your neck. And even then you carried the anthem under your breath, only tearing up your passport in an airport toilet, sobbing as each mouthful of paper made it clear that you won't be going back. You have to understand that no one puts their children in a boat unless the water is safer than the land. No one burns their palms under the trains, beneath carriages. No one spends days and nights in the stomach of a truck, feeding on newspaper, unless the miles traveled means something more than the journey. No one crawls under fences. No one wants to be beaten, pitied. No one chooses refugee camps, or strip searches where your body is left aching, or prison because prison is safer than a city of fire, and one prison guard in the night is better than a truckload of men who look like your father. No one could take it. No one could stomach it. No one's skin would be tough enough. The go-home blacks, refugees, dirty immigrants, asylum seekers, sucking our country dry, niggers with their hands out. They smell strange, savage, messed up their country, and now they want to mess ours up. How do the words, the dirty looks roll off your backs? Maybe because the blow is softer than a limb torn off. Or the words are more tender than 14 men between your legs. Or the insults are easier to swallow than rubble, than bone, than your child's body in pieces. I want to go home. But home is the mouth of a shark. Home is the barrel of a gun, and no one would leave home unless home chased you to the shore, unless home told you to quicken your legs, leave your clothes behind, crawl through the desert, wade through oceans, drown, save, be hunger, beg, forget pride. Your survival is more important. No one leaves home until home is a sweaty voice in your ear saying, leave. Run away from me now. I don't know what I've become, but I know that anywhere is safer than here. Thank you.